It's strange how quiet betrayal sounds. There's no thunder, no crash, no warning. Just silence, the kind that creeps into your lungs and makes it hard to breathe. That night, I learned what silence truly meant. I was in my office long after everyone had gone home. The city outside my window was drowning in rain, thick streaks sliding down the glass, washing away the lights until everything looked blurred and distant. My phone buzzed. A notification from a security app I'd almost forgotten I installed. Motion detected. Living room. At first, I thought it was nothing. Probably the cat. But then the app switched to live feed, and I froze. On the screen, I saw her, Emily, my wife of 12 years. And next to her, Ryan. My best friend. They weren't just talking. They weren't even pretending. The kind of closeness that comes from secrets, from repetition, from guilt that had died long ago. I sat there watching them, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break through. I felt sick, not from what I saw, but from the realization that this wasn't new. The way they moved around each other, it was too natural, too familiar. That's when the silence started. Not outside, inside me. Everything just stopped. The part of me that would have shouted, thrown something, called her, it just vanished. All I could do was stare. Then something darker crept in, a thought, a whisper. Don't say anything. Don't do anything. Yet, I watched until the lights went out, until they disappeared up the stairs, laughing quietly, like everything I had ever given them was a joke. I closed the app, turned off my computer, and sat there, hands trembling, teeth clenched, until the sun began to rise. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did. She walked into the kitchen wearing my shirt, kissed my cheek, smiled like nothing had changed, and maybe for her nothing had, but for me everything had. I smiled back, because that's what she expected. And inside, I started to plan. That was the day my silence began, and the night their lives quietly started to fall apart, not from rage, not from chaos, but from precision. You see, revenge isn't loud. It's patient, and mine had already begun. The morning after I saw them together, everything felt sharper. The sunlight through the kitchen window, the smell of her perfume, the sound of her voice, each one was like a blade twisting quietly under my skin. Emily hummed while making breakfast, wearing that easy smile I used to fall in love with. I watched her, and for the first time, I noticed the tiny pauses, the careful way she spoke, the half-second hesitation before she looked me in the eyes. She was acting. My whole life had turned into a performance, and I was suddenly the only one in the audience who knew the truth. She asked, "Rough night at work?" I said, "You could say that." She smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "I missed you." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly it almost sounded real. I smiled back, pretending to be the same man I was before. But inside, something cold and methodical was taking shape. That day, I went to work like usual. But instead of drowning myself in spreadsheets and deadlines, I spent the day watching, learning. I went through every security recording, every cloud backup, every email she'd ever sent me. I wasn't just looking for proof anymore. I was looking for patterns. Where they met, when, how often. Every detail became a puzzle piece. Ryan, my best friend, my brother in everything but blood, had been in my house more times than I could count. He knew my routines, my habits. He was the one who stood next to me at my wedding. Now, he was the one standing next to my wife in the dark. By evening, I had it all mapped out. Every lie, every secret, every stolen hour. But here's the thing about revenge: it isn't about destruction. It's about control, and control requires patience. That night, I acted like nothing had changed. We had dinner, laughed at a dumb sitcom, even held hands for a moment. She looked relieved, like maybe I hadn't noticed anything. That was the beauty of it. She went to bed early, said she had a headache. I stayed up, staring at the glow of my phone, watching that same security feed. She thought I'd never know, but I knew everything now. When I finally joined her in bed, she stirred in her sleep, and whispered my name. For a second, I almost felt something, sadness, maybe. Grief for the life I thought we had, but grief was weakness, and I didn't have room for weakness anymore. I whispered back, "Sleep well, Emily. You'll need your rest, because tomorrow, the game would truly begin." The next morning, I woke up before Emily. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and her slow, steady breathing beside me. For a moment, I just stood there watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, innocent, even. The kind of peace that comes from believing your lies are still working. I brewed coffee, black and bitter, just how I needed it. My mind wasn't foggy anymore. It was razor sharp. Every detail of the day ahead played out in my mind like a script I'd written long ago. If I wanted revenge, real revenge, I couldn't lash out. I couldn't scream or confront or demand answers. People like Emily and Ryan, they feed on drama. They twist it, turn it, make themselves the victim. No, my revenge would be quiet, surgical. I'd make them destroy themselves. The first step was distance, not physical, but emotional. I started to disappear while staying right in front of her. When she talked, I listened less. When she kissed me, I kissed back slower. I made her feel the space between us growing like a shadow creeping over sunlight. She noticed it within days. Her voice got softer, her touches lingered longer. She was trying to reel me back in, to control the narrative again. But she couldn't, and while she tried to save a marriage she'd already killed, I went to work on Ryan. That was the fun part. We still worked at the same company, same office, same floor. He was in charge of a major client project, and guess who he came to for help every time things got tough? Me, so I helped. I fed him small mistakes, tiny errors that looked like his fault. I made it look natural. An email sent to the wrong person, a miscalculation in a report, a client misunderstanding. In a week, his confidence started to crack. In 2, his manager started questioning him. By the 3rd week, he was sweating through his shirt every time the boss called his name. Meanwhile, Emily and I had dinner with him and his fiancée like nothing was wrong. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm once or twice when she thought I wasn't looking. I smiled, played the perfect husband, the loyal friend, the one who had no idea inside. I was already miles ahead of both of them. I wasn't just getting revenge. I was rewriting the entire story, turning their secret into their undoing. After dinner, Ryan pulled me aside. He looked tired, almost guilty. "Man, I don't know what's going on lately," he said. "Feels like everything I touch falls apart." I clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You're just overworked, buddy. Take it easy." He smiled weakly. "You've always got my back." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Always." It took everything in me not to laugh. That night, when Emily went to shower, I took her phone again. She'd changed her passcode, clever, but not clever enough. In 10 minutes, I was back in. The messages were still there, but fewer now. She was pulling away from him, trying to protect herself, maybe even me. Too late. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I had that. I was building evidence. Evidence that would burn them both to the ground, personally and professionally. As I deleted the messages, I smiled at my reflection in the dark phone screen. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was art, and I was almost done with the first act. There's a thin line between pressure and rupture. You don't always hear the snap. Sometimes you just sense the moment everything you thought steady tilts and finds a new angle. That's how it was the week the first domino fell. For months I had been patient in ways I'd never imagined possible. I watched them with the clinical calm of someone mapping fault lines. I nudged small things at work for Ryan, planted tiny inconveniences in Emily's professional life. Let the community whisper where whispering would do the damage. I never touched the children with my war. I wrapped them with the ordinary small mercies of custody and breakfast and bedtime stories. That string of ordinary acts was another kind of strategy, proof. that the world we'd built could still hold them even as I dismantled parts of their other lives. Then came a Friday that smelled like rain despite the clear sky. The office had a late client demo scheduled, and Ryan, already shaky, asked me to run a final check. I agreed. I always agreed. It's what friends do. My fingers hovered over files that had been moved, subtle edits I'd placed, a spreadsheet with a miscalculated percentage, a footnote that referenced the wrong vendor. No single item would sink a man. It was the accumulation that would. The demo went sideways. A vendor link failed. A slide showed updated figures. The client asked pointed questions. Ryan's voice rose in the small room, and then clipped, and somewhere between the follow-up apologies and the nervous laughter, he fumbled with answers that had once come too easily. I watched him from the back, hands folded, smiling in the polite way that hides a blade. He left the meeting pale and apologetic. 2 days later, his manager called him into the office. I happened to be passing their doorway and saw his shoulders slump as he sat. The conversation was hushed, punctuated by the quiet clack of a keyboard. When Ryan emerged, he was hollowed out in the kind of way ruins look when the scaffolding is taken away. People at work began to catalogue his missteps in hushed tones. Colleagues offered sympathy that was more curiosity than compassion. At the same time, Emily's world began to close in with a more social, corrosive pressure. A friendly parent on the PTA, someone she'd hosted for coffee last winter, sent a tentative email asking if Emily could clarify expense reports from a recent fundraiser. Emily, usually inflappable, typed and deleted responses for an hour. Her hands trembled when she finally hit send. By that afternoon, the board had requested an audit. The formal letter arrived in neutral font. The neutral font carried a charge. She called me in the middle of the night, voice thin. They want documentation, Mark. They want to see receipts, attendees' authorizations. I don't have everything organized. Her words broke like old plaster. I could have stepped in, smoothed, rescued. I could have saved her with the competence I'd once offered without question. Part of me ached to do that for the family, for the ghosts of what we once were. But the other part, the part that had been shaped by the quiet cruelty of planning, refused. I can help, I said instead, slow and steady. Let's get through it together. She sobbed into the phone and said, please, and I agreed because even revenge has to keep its hands clean. You can't burn the house while setting fires in the basement you still sleep in. The audit was surgical. Colleagues who loved paperwork loved precision. They dug through spreadsheets with the somber relish of people who find satisfaction in tidy accounts. The auditors asked for backup documentation, signed vendor slips, contract amendments, authorization emails. When the little mismatches, a reimbursement coded incorrectly, a dinner labeled as client entertainment with no guest list, were assembled under official letterhead. The narrative edged from suspicion to conclusion. One evening, a small stack of printed pages appeared on my kitchen counter, slid beneath the door by an envelope I didn't recognize. The donor logo, the handwritten receipt, the stamped hotel folio, banal, bureaucratic items the world trusts without glamour. I traced the dates with a thumb, feeling the absurd intimacy of evidence beneath my skin. This was the point where paper turned to teeth. Emily got the call at 9. She stepped into the hallway, voice barely there as she listened to the words on the other end. I stood in the doorway and watched the color leave her face in a slow, humiliating unspooling. A pause, then the intake of breath people take right before something important breaks. When she hung up, she looked at me as if at the last person left who could do something. What are they going to do? She whispered. I don't know, I said. It was the only true thing I could offer. That night, Ryan's marriage collapsed with a polite violence. Claire called me 2 days later, voice a raw thing. He's left, she said. He says he needs to get away. He says it's all untrue, but he can't stand the shame. Her words sounded like a verdict. I felt a prickle of something I hadn't planned for, a tug of pity that I shoved down because pity compromises calculation. Then came the moment I had imagined 1,000 times and imagined in simpler terms. My wife, isolated, facing the consequence of choices she'd made at night and concealed by day. I expected her to rage, to beg, to bargain. She did all of those things across a handful of hours. Calls to friends that went unanswered, messages deleted and retyped, attempts to rationalize a private life under the public gaze. But her most raw confession came in the quiet of our kitchen at 3 in the morning when she stood under the sink light and wept like someone learning how to grieve without ceremony. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice breaking. "What do you want?" I'd rehearsed answers that would disdain her, that would expose her as cold. The truth I gave was narrower, colder. "I want the truth to mean something." She folded into herself then, not with the defiance of the unrepentant but with the excruciating smallness of someone whose constructs had been dismantled. The sound was so small it almost felt like mercy, but the breaking point was not only personal. The scandal bled into reputations, into payroll, into friends who had to choose. A vendor who'd been paid late because invoices were routed differently found his business strained. A mother volunteering at the school lost the committee support she'd counted on. A junior colleague was passed over for promotion because the team needed stability. The ledger of consequence had columns I hadn't intended to tally. And there, amid the rubble, something shifted inside me that I hadn't planned on. The work of revenge had carved away the softer parts of me like a sculptor removing clay. I began to recognize my voice in other people's mouths, the same clinical detachment, the same quiet moralism that convinces you this is about righteousness and not about the emptiness you're trying to fill. The day a local columnist posted a careful, fact-based piece tying the audit to a broader conversation about conflict of interest, the comment threads bloomed. Some readers called for resignation. Others argued nuance. The line between public interest and private destruction blurred into a gray smear. I read it with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me and felt neither triumph nor shame, a hollow satisfaction like a job done to spec. That night, I found myself at the foot of my children's beds, listening to their soft breath. They had no idea the politics of adults, the ledger entries, the emails, the phone calls. They dreamt in a smaller currency, dragons, lost toys, endless summers. My chest tightened because I had not only taken a stand for my dignity, I had rearranged the world they moved through. There is no reverse in a climate. And then, with a quietness that mocked all my planning, Ryan made the mistake that would define him beyond his poor choices. In an attempt to defend himself publicly, he accused me to a mutual friend of orchestrating a smear campaign. He framed my actions as the desperate direction of a man who'd refused to accept aging failure or the slow moving of life away from him. He painted the chaos as my pathology, not his privilege. In seconds, I watched a narrative shift that could undo months of careful work. I did not panic. Panic is for people who have not prepared for consequences. Instead, I set a meeting with my lawyer and read and compiled one more file, the cleanest, coldest record I'd ever assembled. It contained everything: timestamps, transfer trails, hotel folios, witness notes. It was not about vengeance anymore in the way I'd first felt it. It was about an accounting that could not be refuted by rumor. As I closed the folder that night, rain finally began to fall on the roof, soft, patient, washing the world outside but never quite changing the stain left inside a house. The breaking point had been reached. The noise would come next. The public would make its judgments in comment threads and coffee shops. The private world would require stitches and patience. I stood on the threshold of both and felt, for the first time since the night I saw them on my security feed, a quiet doubt, not about whether they should pay for what they'd done, but whether paying would actually change the thing that had been broken. Not contracts and reputations, but trust, the fragile scaffolding of family. There was one step left before everything moved from ruin to repair or ruin to further ruin. I folded the last sheet into the folder, locked it in a drawer, and breathed. Tomorrow, I would hand it over. Tomorrow, the world would choose what mattered more, mercy or the harsh, luminous truth. The morning I turned over the folder, the air felt unnaturally still, the kind of silence that settles before a verdict. I'd rehearsed what I'd say, but when the moment came, words seemed too small for what I was about to unleash. The law firm's conference room was neutral, beige walls, chrome fixtures, the hum of an air conditioner that could have been in any building in America. Across the table sat my lawyer, calm and methodical, and beside him, a man from the Internal Review Board, clipboard ready. I placed the folder between us, its edges worn from being handled too many times. Everything you need is in there, I said. Receipts, statements, emails. It's the truth, all of it. The man nodded, opened it, and began reading. Pages turned with quiet finality. Every rustle of paper felt like a stone dropping into a deep, still pond. I didn't stay to watch them finish. I left before the room filled with the smell of guilt, that sterile mix of ache, sweat, and the faint electric hum of systems digesting evidence. Outside, the sunlight was sharp and merciless. I stood for a moment on the curb, the weight of months pressing on my chest. My hands trembled slightly. I told myself it was just adrenaline, but deep down I knew it was the beginning of something irreversible. By evening, the emails started, then the phone calls, then the headlines. The audit results went public faster than anyone expected. The board suspended Emily pending investigation. Her photo, my wife's photo, appeared beside headlines that used words like misappropriation and ethical breach. They didn't print my name, but I could see the shadows of my fingerprints all over the text. Ryan's company followed within hours. They launched an internal probe, citing conflicts of interest and improper collaborations. It was all corporate phrasing for the same truth. He was finished. The man who'd once bragged about being untouchable was suddenly radioactive. No one would take his calls, and me. I should have felt vindicated. I should have celebrated. But standing in my kitchen that night, with the TV flickering the news in the background, I felt something entirely different. Empty, like I'd won a war in which every soldier, including me, had died. The kids were asleep upstairs. The house was quiet except for the steady tick of the clock. Emily sat across from me at the table, eyes red, face pale. She didn't cry this time. Maybe she'd run out of tears. Maybe she finally understood the cost of her silence. "You did this," she said softly. Not an accusation, a statement. "Yes," I said. "Why?" I looked at her for a long time. "Because you broke something that doesn't heal. And pretending it could. Pretending we were fine. It was killing me." She stared down at her hands. "You think this makes us even?" "No," I whispered. "Nothing ever does." There was no shutting, no drama, no thrown plates or slammed doors. Just silence, deep, suffocating silence. The kind that follows explosions. Weeks passed. Ryan left town. No one knew where. Emily resigned before the board made it official. I kept working, kept functioning, but I was moving through a life that no longer fit. The house felt too big. The laughter of my kids too innocent for the man I'd become. One evening, as the sun bled out behind the trees, my daughter, 8 years old, too wise for her age, asked me, "Daddy, are you happy now?" The question hit harder than any confrontation I'd faced. I looked at her, at the small trust in her eyes, and I realized I didn't know what happiness looked like anymore. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said. "Maybe one day." She nodded, thoughtful, as if that answer made sense in her small world. Then she hugged me tight, forgiving, undeserved. That night, I went out to the porch and sat there until the stars came out. The world was quiet again. But it wasn't peace, not really. Peace implies resolution. What I had was aftermath, the fragile stillness that comes when everything has been said, done, and destroyed. I thought about calling Emily, about apologizing, about trying to build something new from the ashes. But I didn't. Some ruins are meant to be left standing as reminders, proof that fire existed, that choices were made, that love can turn to judgment and still, somehow, leave space for mercy. When I finally went inside, I passed by a mirror in the hallway. For a second, I barely recognized the man staring back, older, harder. But maybe, just maybe, finally honest, that revenge hadn't brought me peace. But it had brought me truth. And maybe, for now, that was enough.